How do you do?
If you think Guillermo del Toro doesn't understand Frankenstein, I have some questions about your understanding of the text.
If you are not to avoid me, love, then I will indulge in rage.
I thought that Wuthering Heights would be the only controversial book adaptation Jacob Elordi would be part of, but Guillermo del Toro's latest film, Frankenstein, has become one of the most interesting discourse generators in a while. I watched the film in theaters, I really enjoyed it, and I came in hearing whispers that the film was shallow, not a faithful adaptation, and not his best work.
Yeah, well, that's just like, your opinion, man.
What I saw was an adaptation that I felt wasn't just retelling Frankenstein, but much in the vein of Greta Gerwig's Little Women adaptation, took into consideration the over a century's worth of conversation about the text and the author's own personal life to enrich the narrative. Even with the changes from the novel, I felt like Del Toro's Frankenstein felt very much like it captured the core of what I think Frankenstein means, and so I'm going to prove it to you. Preparing for this video, I reread Frankenstein, I rewatched the 1930s original film, then Del Toro's film again, and then I threw myself into research.
Strange and ancient books.
My main source for this video in terms of Mary Shelley and her life was from Professor Charlotte Gordon, who wrote both The Extraordinary Lives of Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley, and Mary Shelley, A Very Short Introduction. Both were really impactful to making this video, but if you want a more streamlined look at Mary Shelley, I recommend the latter. Doing this research wasn't simply for my own personal satisfaction, but due to so many people claiming that Del Toro, due to being a man, didn't understand Mary Shelley. That this man who spent his entire life obsessed with this novel didn't get it. I know people throw around the term media literacy everywhere, and I don't think it's a matter of media literacy to dislike a film, to find aspects of it boring, and for it to not be the kind of Frankenstein adaptation you might have wanted. That is called an opinion. And as of now, you're still allowed to have one. What I do find lazy are all these sweeping assumptions about Del Toro's reading and intentionality behind the text. I found it suspicious and bioessentialist before I did any deeper research, and now having spent several weeks going full hog on Frankenstein, it doesn't make any sense either if you are claiming to have an understanding of Frankenstein beyond that of a lay person. I don't expect the average person to come into a film with a deep knowledge of all things Frankenstein or of Del Toro's process. You can disagree with his conclusion, but almost every single change Del Toro makes has in fact very tangible roots to both the text of Frankenstein, the 1818 and the 1831 version, and very much reflects the academic and literary conversations that have existed about the book and its author since it was published. Let's get into it.
We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein.
Frankenstein was written by Mary Shelley. At the time of publication, she was 19 years old and had lived a life.
That little girl is a child. I don't want to see you sniffing around her anymore this afternoon. Do you understand?
The book was originally published in 1818, and then a revised edition was released in 1831. Considered to be the first science fiction novel, as well as a gothic horror novel and a pro-naturalist work, the story is about a medical student named Victor Frankenstein who decides to create life.
I create life!
By assembling a man out of body parts and using electricity possibly to bring him to life. After the strangest moment of post-nut clarity, Victor rejects his creature after it is born and abandons it. Frankenstein is an epistolary novel, so we, the reader, are being told this story in the form of letters from explorer Robert Walton, who is reciting and sharing what Victor Frankenstein told him about what happened. So we can put on our unreliable narrator hat at this point. Victor is also the one who recounts the creature's tale, which was again told to him, where the creature or the Damon, as he's referred to, Damon Targaryen Frankenstein, explains that he learned about fire and to avoid humans who were afraid of him, and that he stayed in a hovel near a family and learned to read. He eventually reveals himself to the family's blind father, who is kind to him, but when the rest of the family returns, they chase him away because they think he is gross and scary. As he is fleeing, he does momentarily pause to save a young girl from drowning, but is shot by her father, who assumes he was attacking her. He does not die, but needless to say, this does not give the creature a good image of humanity, and he becomes slowly embittered. He travels to Geneva to try and confront his creator and runs into William Frankenstein, Victor's younger brother. He kills William and frames the family servant Justine for it, and she is hanged. After relaying this story, the creature asks his father to make him a companion so he will no longer be alone.
Oh God, you don't know what you're asking.
I do know that for the sympathy of one living being, I would make peace with all.
Victor at first reluctantly agrees, but as he gets close to the idea of making the bride, he is haunted by the idea of having to pay more child support if they breed, and stops. And the creature says he will be with Victor on his wedding night. Now, for some reason, Victor thinks this means that the monster will kill him after he gets married. But that's not what happens, and instead Victor's fiancée, then very briefly wife Elizabeth, is strangled by the monster. Victor and the creature / Damon then become locked in an emotional tete-a-tete that ends in front of Walton when, despite everything, Victor tries to go on before just dying. The creature mourns his father for a moment and then decides to go kill himself, or unalive as the kids would say. Walton realizes that exploration is shit, and he's going home, which I think is a good call. Exploration is scary.
Why do you weep?
He was my father.
Since its publication, the work has been the subject of discussion, fascination, and adaptation. It was first a stage show, which began the long-standing trend of making the monster less intelligent and taking the morals into a more comedic place. Due to copyright issues, because copyright kind of didn't really exist for a long time, Mary Shelley did not see a lot of money from the book or its first adaptations, which is partly why it was released in 1831. People's general image of Frankenstein, at least in the popular culture, tends to have little to do with the original book, but very much to do with the popular 1931 film, which starred Boris Karloff as Frankenstein's monster in the iconic green makeup and bolted look that Universal has been maintaining ever since. Jack Pierce, who came up with the makeup look, said, quote, "I figured that Frankenstein, who was a scientist but no practicing surgeon, would take the simplest surgical way. He would cut the top of the skull off straight across like a pot lid, hinge it, pop the brain in, and then clamp it on tight. That is the reason I decided to make the monster's head square and flat like a shoebox and dig that big scar across his forehead with the metal clamps holding it together." The costume in its entirety was around 48 pounds, and Karloff lost a lot of weight while wearing it. But the look that they were going for was a pitiful humanity look that took around 3 hours to put together every single day, and Karloff would have to take off his dentures to give him that kind of like sunken cheek look, you know, before buccal fat removal. It is the Universal Frankenstein brand that also invented things like the character of Igor, and leaning more into the cliche of the mad scientist. For example, the it's alive scene.
It's alive! In the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God.
That's not in the books. But one thing that has remained throughout the subsequent adaptations is an examination of the idea.
Who is the monster and who is the man?
One interesting thing about the 1930s film is that it has a Henry Frankenstein as the mad scientist and then Victor Frankenstein as his brother, and they're both kind of in love with Henry's fiancée, who is still Elizabeth, so there's a little bit of a love triangle there. Don't know why. And it's also said that the brain that Henry uses for his creation is a criminal brain, and that element of nature versus nurture is slowly examined in the film.
The brain that was stolen from my laboratory was a criminal brain.
Oh, well,
After all, it's only a piece of dead tissue.
The creature is really reactive, and though he does kill Igor, Igor had been torturing him and tormenting him with fire in the beginning, and he only reacts violently when violence is acted upon him. One of the most famous moments of the film is when he meets a young girl and they throw flowers into the water to watch them float. And he, not understanding that she cannot float, throws her in and she drowns. It is a loss of innocence for the creature, and then for the rest of the movie, which is roughly like 8 minutes, he is the monster creature that will be filling Halloween stores for years and years to come. Sequels like Bride of Frankenstein and the rest of the Universal Monster Frankenstein series are why certain assumptions are made about the character, like just calling the creature Frankenstein. That is because of the Universal movie. Some aspects are pulled from concepts of a thread of an idea from Shelley's own work, but they are very much their own canon. But film is a visual medium, and with even works like Van Helsing, A Perfect Movie, I Will Not Hear Slander, or Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein, which is not as good as Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman, there's a certain amount of cultural imagery that people assume about Frankenstein. And all of that history is what needs to be considered when revisiting the film, because it is more than just an intellectual property or one novel. It is a brand.
Would the doctor care for a brandy before retiring?
No.
Some warm milk? Perhaps?
Guillermo del Toro is known as a monster lover, having made one of our holy texts, The Shape of Water, and has also shown an understanding of the Gothic romance as seen in Crimson Peak, a film that has been vindicated by history.
You lied to me!
I did.
You poisoned me! You told me you loved me!
I do.
Therefore, it isn't surprising that he would be a fan of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. From around 2007, we've heard whispers of Del Toro wanting to make this film. He's lived with this for 30 years. It's his Bible, Isaac says. And yet he has somehow believed so much in that love that he's letting it tell him what to do. He's not controlling it. In Del Toro's version, the creature and Victor are essentially one and the same. They are a mirror of each other. They're just these twin things, much like what his story is about. The way that a father passes on to a son, and that son must become a father and passes it on to his son. And the way these circles just keep going and keep going, Isaac says. At the end, this heartbreak happens and this forgiveness happens, and the hope is that this creature, who's all set up to create chaos and violence, somehow stops that and changes it all. I did pick up the very big and elegant book companion to Del Toro's work, which goes into expansive detail about Del Toro's feelings about the text, the romantics, and why he made certain adaptational decisions.
How long have you been thinking about how you would translate the story to screen, and the changes that you would make?
Ridiculous as it sounds, I've been thinking about it for 54 years and planning and thinking, how do I solve this? You know, what is fused in this movie is my conscientious study over the decades of the Romantics, Mary Shelley, Gothic fiction, Anne Radcliffe, Percy, Lord Byron, her own biography, my own biography, everything that is in between the structures is there. Like I believe adaptation is a great word, because it's like a fish having to adapt to land. It's not a subtle thing. It has to grow legs. It has to grow lungs. It's pretty brutal. But if you manage to, there's an alchemy in the process where you subtract things and add things, and the empty spaces in between stay. So it's the spirit of the book. It's not the book, but it's the spirit of the book. And you know, war is in the movie because war framed the Romantic movement. Mary Shelley's mother went to the French Revolution. Lord Byron wrote through the aftermath of Waterloo and wrote a beautiful poem on that, which is quoted at the end of the film. Mary Shelley is captured by Scotland, Bath, Dundee, Edinburgh. Well, then I decided to move Edinburgh into the forefront of the movie, blah, blah, blah. These are things that come out of love, not out of prudishness.
And I don't need to convince you of those changes, but it makes it very clear that Del Toro very much considers this his interpretation and vision while making the text the centerpiece of the narrative. He is referred to it as making love to a widow. You know, you're respecting the first husband and that, you know, he was there, but this is your wife now. Could you please give me my Olivia Rodrigo Stanley? I only refer to it as such. I don't want people to think that I just have a Stanley. This is a gut Stanley. I couldn't afford to go to the concert, so I got this Stanley instead. Much like in the original film, we open with a ship being stranded. An explosion is heard and a bloody Victor Frankenstein is found. In rescuing him onto the ship, the creature follows and goes one punch man on everyone in his way, surviving all of the Industrial Revolution's finest implements of steam. Victor then has time to explain to the captain that he has daddy issues, mommy issues, annoying asshole tendencies, and deadbeat dad tendencies. We see the trauma of growing up with a perfectionist doctor father who failed to save his beloved mother in childbirth, which causes Victor to grow up without his maternal impact fully, and decides that his new divine purpose is to defeat death.
But how?
Jumping ahead into the future, we see adult Victor peacocking to the scientific elite about his ability to make a corpse reanimate partially. They reject his accomplishments as an abomination, except one, Henrik Harlander, who is the Igor Fritz equivalent in this film. He is a wealthy arms manufacturer who funds Victor's experiments and is the uncle to Elizabeth, William's fiancée, who Victor is infatuated with because she has opinions, and that makes her sexy.
And you think me a fool?
Run to your brandy and cigars. The boys are waiting.
She's into me, right?
Victor makes the creature and kills his benefactor, but is disappointed by how slowly the creature seems to develop. When he shares the accomplishment with Elizabeth and William, Elizabeth has a lot of empathy for the creature, but Victor does not respond well.
You, the great Victor Frankenstein, you made a mistake.
The creature knows but one word and one word alone. Victor, 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 Victor.
Decides to burn the lab down in order to kill the creature, and has a moment of regret, but it is too late and it all goes to shit. It is here that the creature arrives on the scene and decides to share his part of the story, because this is his tale too. After escaping the fire, the creature becomes a Disney princess, Snow White edition, going through the forest, bonding with animals, barely escaping hunters, and he ends up in a barn next to a family by Paige Michalchuk from Degrassi, and learns how to speak and read and helps them with household tasks. When they go on a hunting trip, leaving the blind grandfather alone, the creature makes himself known and bonds with him by reading very on-brand texts like Paradise Lost. Anti-wolf propaganda happens with the wolves arriving and killing the old man, but then the greatest monster of all arrives, man. And they try to kill the creature while he's fleeing, and it's just not really great for him. Elizabeth and William's wedding comes, and Victor once again tries to act like Elizabeth is interested in him. She is not, and thinks he's kind of an asshole.
Leave my chambers now. Leave me!
The creature arrives and asks Victor to make him a companion, which Victor rejects, and conflict ensues. In the process, William and Elizabeth are both killed, with William delivering the most divisive line of the movie.
You are the monster.
The creature takes Elizabeth back to a cave, and they share a moment before she dies. Victor pursues the creature to the Arctic, where we catch up now. And after hearing that harrowing tale, they realize that maybe they could both use a little bit of therapy. Victor dies, they call each other father and son beforehand, and then the creature uses his monster strength to help the ship flee the ice, and the explorers go home instead of going back to the North Pole, because again, exploration sucks. Go home. And the creature just goes forward, and maybe he'll go to France and haunt an opera house. That seems like a good job for a scarred man to do. So like I said, I saw Frankenstein in theaters. I really enjoyed it. I didn't find it boring, and I felt like it shows the usual care and attention that we're used to seeing in a Del Toro movie, including beautiful gowns and a set design that makes the most of its budget. I also thought it looked really good. Some people say it didn't. I don't know. All theaters are different now. It's very unfortunate. Casting-wise, Jacob Elordi has been really rising in the public eye, and while he was always certainly talented, so many of his roles have been wrapped up in this kind of like toxic male sexuality, physical aspects that his talent never seriously connected with me. I'm sorry to all the Saltburn heads out there, including the one in this very room, but I think this is one of his finest roles. I think he is constantly navigating rage and vulnerability, and his natural height gives him a really intense presence. When he is chained up in the dungeon and interacts with Elizabeth and Victor and the world around him, it's just really compelling. And for those who think Elordi is too hot for the role, all I'm going to say is that canonically the creature is not really meant to be monstrous. He's actually described to be kind of like beautiful, but in a, you know, bunch of bodies put together way. But he was intended to be beautiful, just uncanny valley.
I was meant to be new. I was meant to be beautiful.
Oscar Isaac is playing an intentionally more campy Victor Frankenstein, and in many ways after watching the 1930s version, I can see that that was probably a lot of the inspiration for Del Toro, where that version of Frankenstein is also a little bit more camp, a little bit more up. I kept thinking that his Victor and Sam Reed's Lestat would get along really well.
Of course. Of course.
You're lucky to be hanged. You would have died within the year.
I do think that Victor being older and slightly more severe makes his morality more black than gray. Plus, my own biases already see him that way, mostly because the very act of grave robbing and deciding to make a person out of body parts is such a hubristic idea that I would not trust the person who had it. Well, he's just trying to make decisions. He's just trying to, like, you know, push the boundaries. He's an AI tech bro. And that's not just me. People have been saying that. Read the academic article. In the introduction to the vintage classic edition of Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson, it says, "We are who Mary Shelley imagined we would be. More than 200 years later, when this 19-year-old woman vaulted across time, she landed here with us, the first people on the planet to create a new kind of intelligence, an artificial life form that we hope or fear will be faster, stronger, smarter, not subject to the constraints of time as we are, a different way of being, There are some key changes that people have brought up when it comes to Del Toro's Frankenstein versus the book. The omission of characters like Henry Clerval, who is Victor's best friend, and Justine, the female servant who is framed for the death of William, who in the books is a small child. Clerval is often omitted, or his role is changed because he does exist just to be another person for whom Victor feels guilty about not saving. Justine is slightly more substantial of a character, but I think her omission comes because of the novel itself. Frankenstein is not that long of a book. It's less than 200 pages. This is the Norton edition of Frankenstein, right? This much is the book. And then this is everything else. Carries a big stick, but it is a fairly compact novel. Things happen very quickly, and the Justine situation mostly happens not in front of Victor. He is not there when William is killed, and the trial and everything kind of moves very quickly, and again, is just more things for Victor to feel bad about. She's only necessary if you have a young William, and multiple adaptations change William because his age doesn't really matter, especially if you put another kid in there to be vulnerably killed by the monster. Shout out to that girl with the flowers. In the novel, Victor instantly rejects the monster as soon as it starts moving. In comparison, in the film, Victor is pleased with the creature until he sees the limitations of his educational process. Repeating his own movie father, he tries to teach with violence, ignoring all of the kindness he learned from his mother, but instead repeats the actions of his father. Again, this change is probably born from the 1931 film, where again, Frankenstein does not instantly reject his creature and tries to see how far this whole science thing goes. And I think it makes sense for him to have created this creature and then slowly have regret. I think it to do your life's work and just say, right after is a little bit weird. People have also taken issue with Victor having an abusive father because they say it is justifying his actions. And all I can say is, no, people have bad dads. It doesn't mean that you then go create life and abandon it. We're not all Nick Cannon.
You bear my name, Victor, and with it my reputation.
A lion doesn't concern himself with the opinions of the sheep. They're the same picture.
Mary Shelley's novel makes it clear that the fatal flaw for her titular character is his inability to take responsibility for his own actions, which starts with abandoning his child. Yes, the creature goes on to commit murder, but part of the reason he's even able to do that is because Victor will not tell anyone what he did in the book.
Don't you ever think of anyone or anything but yourself?
When Justine is framed for murder, Victor knows the truth, but convinces himself that if he tells people the truth, people will think he's mad. You have a book that outlines that you did this. Just show them the book. A character I've seen even more polarizing is Mia Goth's Elizabeth. In the book Frankenstein, in the 1818 text, they are cousins, but in a later version, it's changed to her just being an orphan. I know some people thought that like the incest was moved to be cowardly. I don't again, I think that's just kind of a reach. In the book, Elizabeth and Victor are to be married, and basically she was adopted so that Victor could marry her, and then she's killed by the creature. And Elizabeth in the novel is very much working within the zone of the angel in the home femininity. She is kept in the dark by Victor about the truth of the circumstances around her, leading to her death and the deaths of others she cares about. In the film, she is less of an innocent and sheltered character. She is interested in insects and shows an intellectual vigor that makes her a stand-in for women like Mary Shelley herself and her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. This modern update makes some of the more gendered themes in Frankenstein clear, mainly how part of why the creature ends up the way he does is because of a lack of a kind maternal figure. And that's not just me reading into it. Let's not forget, Mary Shelley's mother died in childbirth. One might even infer that the kindness that the creature does maintain in this adaptation is due to Elizabeth herself showing him another way of being kind, with the leaf example. He does learn how to speak with kindness. Elizabeth and the creature's relationship being romantic, maternal, or just platonic doesn't matter to me because it's gothic, it's a little bit of everything. And I think her as a stand-in for the bride was really interesting because she dies on her wedding day to William. And I personally think this is apt because neither Mary Shelley nor her mother believed in marriage. They thought of the institution as a trap for women, and I think that there is a freedom in that ending, even though it is tragic. You don't have to like it, obviously, but I think it works. I also don't think that she's a manic pixie dream girl because she likes insects. Please learn other words. Morality-wise, I've seen people kind of bristle against the seemingly black and white morality of Del Toro's Frankenstein, with Victor being bad and the monster being good, and that being an oversimplification of the text. And I don't see it that way. In my mind, Victor Frankenstein is already an unreliable narrator who is retelling his greatest sin and must make excuses for his actions, which includes, again, leaving his child behind the moment things get difficult. And of course, there becomes the question of, does this mean the creature isn't responsible for his actions? This has been a conversation as old as the book itself. No, the creature is not morally innocent for killing a bunch of innocent people, and Victor is still the epicenter of that disaster. It's still ultimately his fault for not teaching his kid anything. The novel has been called many things. Above all, it is a novel about responsibility. Victor Frankenstein is a deadbeat dad. After the first flush of creation, Frankenstein refuses responsibility for what he has brought into the world, something the monster tells him often. The monster has no name, no home, no family, no education. He trails after Victor because he has nowhere to go, no money, just the rags on his back. Yet Victor is filled with pity for himself and loathing for his monster. He's a classic case of Darvo, deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. He blames the monster for turning to crime. In this, Mary Shelley was making a powerful social and political statement. The new order of the factory system robbed men and women of their basic humanity. They were only the human parts of the machine. Mary Shelley cleverly shows us what it means to be deprived of knowledge and the life of the mind. Many women sunk into listless depression, not because they were the weaker sex, but because they were bored. The monster first becomes depressed and then violent. Yes, the monster turns into a criminal and a murderer, but where for him is the social responsibility, the compassion, the opportunity, the access to learning, or even the protection of the law? Like every woman at the time, the monster is not a person as far as his rights are concerned. Person is a legal term, and only persons will have rights. And this might be a tangent, but I wanted to include this. One of the rabbit holes that stuck with me was from this line from Charlotte Gordon about the connection between Frankenstein and the book Native Son by Richard Wright. She says, Mary Shelley emphasizes the injustice that the creature faces simply because he looks different from the other characters. No matter how much he seeks love and educates himself, society will always see him as savage and monstrous. As the scholar Adam Potke demonstrates, the novel has played an important role in the African-American literary naturalism, influencing famous works such as Richard Wright's Native Son. Now I gotta tell you, I had to light a cigarette when I read that because my brain was activating in ways that I had never been so intellectually aroused. I instantly had to go and reread Native Son. And when I was doing it, I'm like, oh, this is making sense. Native Son is about Bigger Thomas, a black young adult in Chicago who accidentally kills a white woman and is arrested and tried for murder. Bigger is shown throughout the novel to have been beaten down by the systematic racism of the time period. It makes him bitter, paranoid, and violent in ways that are never justified, but very much placed on trial with him for the reader to examine. Much like Frankenstein and Mary Shelley, Richard Wright was inspired by the naturalist movement, which decided that there was no real free will, that there was a predestination that some people are compelled to follow. That is an ideology that is reflected especially in the 1831 text of Frankenstein, where in it Victor is written as being more compelled by destiny than in the original 1818 text. You can even look at the creature's reaction towards killing William as similar to Bigger's feelings about killing Mary. I gazed upon my victim, and my heart swelled with exaltation and hellish triumph. Clapping my hands, I exclaimed, I too can create desolation. My enemy is not impregnable. This death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him. Bars. He had murdered and had created a new life for himself. It was something that was all his own, and it was the first time in his life he had had anything that others could not take from him. There was in him a kind of terrified pride in feeling and thinking that someday he would be able to say publicly that he had done it. Exactly. In both, we see someone using violence as a way to take back control from a society that insists upon harming and belittling them for their difference. Mary Shelley was, again, very well read and read slave narratives, and they were impactful in her creation of the character of the creature, which is why I keep going back to the idea that, again, he's not just adapting the novel, but the whole goddamn enchilada, baby. I also don't think the message is hidden. I actually think it's very heavy-handed to the point where when the discourse was happening, I was a bit confused as to why people thought the book was as nuanced as some people were claiming. In the book, when the creature is telling its experience of how it learned to read, the books he mentions are The Sorrows of Young Werther, Paradise Lost, and Parallel Lives by Plutarch. This is the 1800s version of a performative man. A modern day Frankenstein would be reading A Little Life, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicles, and Atlas Shrugged. Sometimes I think we can forget that at one point these classics were contemporary novels. All three of the works that Shelley has the creature read are all works that educated people and readers of the time would know and understand the shorthand for. The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe is also an epistolary novel about a young man who becomes suicidal because of unrequited love, with the main character being a romantic, sensitive, obsessive, creative man. It's one of the biggest hits of its day, and it made Goethe an icon of the Romantic movement, so it was super popular. Even Napoleon read it. Paradise Lost is Bible fan fiction about the fall of Satan that is the reason why we have Wicked, and is all about raging against her creator father. Frankenstein opens with a quote from Paradise Lost. I saw someone online say they reject calling the creature Adam because they see it as a surface level reading of the text, and it's like, yeah, because that's literally the surface of the text. Like, it's Parallel Lives by Plutarch is it's a Greek text about 48 male figures from Greek and Roman mythology and history, and uses their parallel biographies to tell these ethical and historical moral concepts. Some names you might know: Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, Theseus, Romulus, wow, I wonder why she had her creature read this book. I don't say this to ignore that you could read this book and get different ideas from it. I do, however, think that this idea of a super nuanced, morally gray narrative is, in my opinion, a little bit of self-projection onto the text and speaks to a desire for more nuance in general. But that doesn't make Del Toro's changes disloyal. However, I do recognize that what Del Toro has done is put a massive spotlight to one of the many conflicting readings of Frankenstein in the modern era. Who do you root for? As a modern reader, I simply do not feel bad for Victor Frankenstein. I'm just like, you're a deadbeat dad, dog. And, it is what it is. Now, as an adaptation, it's very clear that, yes, Del Toro has a bias towards the monster and a really critical view of the character of Victor Frankenstein, especially since for Del Toro, the relationship between those characters is of a father-son narrative. But I think that makes sense because Frankenstein is not just adapting just a vision of Frankenstein, but also romantic, capital R, men, and the tech bros who make themselves the face of genius and see divine mandates in their knowledge with little humanity or foresight for the consequences of their actions. You know, like the AI shit we're dealing with now. Something a woman at the start of the Industrial Revolution, bearing witness to the ends of slavery, would have something to say about. And spoiler alert, Mary Shelley did. What has been interesting about the gendered and Eurocentric language around some of the criticism about Del Toro is that it reveals a lack of knowledge about the subject matter beyond the primary source material. It is clear that Del Toro isn't just an admirer of Shelley as a writer, but what her full life encompassed. People are saying that they want a woman director like Catherine Bigelow or Greta Gerwig, and I'm just like, you're just saying white women's names. It doesn't make your choices correct. Like Catherine Bigelow? Now? Strange days, Captain Bigelow. Maybe. But military-industrial complex Bigelow? In fact, almost every choice and deviation Del Toro makes can either be justified by Mary Shelley or Mary Wollstonecraft's own background, their letters, changes in the 1831 version, and academic discussions about the text across multiple branches. One that I found most interesting is the racialized dynamic between Oscar's Victor as the Dark One and his younger brother William as the Golden Boy.
Our raven black hair, our deep dark eyes, even our quiet, at times nervous disposition seemed to exasperate him to no end. William grew full of sunshine and smiles. He was of a calmer, gentler disposition, clearly favored by my father.
One of the things that changed from the 1818 to 1831 text was that Mary Shelley had become very pessimistic and jaded through the loss of her husband, her siblings, and several of her children. Politically, she'd always been vocal, but in the 1831 version, things become even more unsubtle. She turns Elizabeth from Victor's cousin to simply an orphan, making her more vulnerable to societal harm, and uses the adoption scene as an examination of the racial dynamics within the Frankenstein family. My mother, accompanied by me, visited this abode. She found a peasant and his wife, hardworking, bent down by care and labor, distributing a scantily meal, 5 hungry babes. Among these, there was one which attracted my mother far above all the rest. She appeared of a different stock. The 4 others were dark-eyed, hardy little vagrants. I know, I said it like a slur. Hardy little vagrants. This child was thin and very fair. Her hair was the brightest living gold, and despite the poverty of her clothing, seemed to set a crown of distinction on her head. Her brow was clear and ample, her blue eyes cloudless, and her lips and the molding of her face so expressive of sensibility and sweetness that none could behold her without looking on her as of a distinct species, a being heaven-sent and bearing a celestial stamp in all her features. That feels racially coded. To understand Mary Shelley, we have to talk about her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, someone who can be considered a once-in-a-generation thinker. She was born to an alcoholic family that didn't really understand her. She spent her youth as the invisible second child in a family of 7 with an abusive father. Mary did thrive well in school and became a radical thinker, especially during the French Revolution. Her work on the education of women made her famous even across the pond, where Aaron Burr, sir, yes, that one, used her as an example for his own daughter Theodosia's education. Also, doesn't it kind of fuck with you to think that these things are happening at the same time? Yes, it is. Wollstonecraft did have a child with Gilbert Imlay, an American politician, as the result of a passionate affair between the two. Mary Wollstonecraft believed in free love and equality and didn't ask for much from Imlay, but he still ghosted her with a child, a young girl named Frances. Years later, she met and married William Godwin, a forefather of the anarchist movement, and they had a daughter together. Wollstonecraft died 11 days after giving birth due to childbed fever. Mary grew up loved, but to a degree also fetishized. Everyone saw her as an extension of the genius of her mother and father. If I were to be critical of Mary in any way, she has a lot of Nepo baby energy. She seemed to very much embrace the shadow of glory she lived in and believed in that kind of same intellectual glory with others, which led her to her relationship with one Percy Shelley, one of my nemesis. Percy Shelley was married to a woman named Harriet when he first met the 16-year-old Mary.
That little girl is a child.
And he told Mary that his wife had betrayed him by wanting stability from him instead of embracing his life as a romantic radical poet. Being 16 and dumb, Mary and Percy consummated their love on the grave of her mother, and then they ran off with her younger stepsister in tow. This action would lead to a lot of sorrow in Mary's life. Her father essentially disowned her, and her stepmother was furious about her daughter being taken away. Mary's older half-sister, Frances, committed suicide, being left alone to face the brunt of scorn from her family. Percy Shelley's wife, Harriet, also committed suicide, something that would haunt Mary for the rest of her life. In 1816, Percy Shelley and Mary married. Mary suffered a number of miscarriages and stillbirths, and watched the romantic men of her era leave women at the wayside of their ambition. Her own stepsister, Clara, who people assumed was also sleeping with her husband, had an affair with Lord Byron, who again I also hate.
That little girl is a child.
Which resulted in a child named Allegra, who was sent away and died at the age of 5 of either typhus or malaria. When Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, she may have already been 19, but she had buried a sister and saw neglectful fatherhood in all of its forms. All of this trauma and reality very clearly went into the writing of Frankenstein. So if you're wondering why there's daddy issues in Del Toro's Frankenstein, it's because it was in the source material too.
Who are you? He never gave me a name.
By connecting Frankenstein to her own genesis, she felt abandoned by her creator. Like Frankenstein, she felt compelled to create. Her own birth had caused the death of her mother, but it also brought life to her characters. It is as though she wrote the tale for herself, becoming both author and audience, creator and created, mother and daughter, inventor and destroyer. Adapting a text like Frankenstein would be hard for anyone, but choosing to nerd out about a text with a cultural footprint of over 100 years is no easy feat, especially doing it as an outsider.
I am an immigrant. I think that the greatest thing our art does is to erase the lines in the sand.
Adaptations are also difficult to manage in terms of expectations. In addition to Frankenstein this year, we also saw 2 other adaptations, Nia DaCosta's Hedda and Wicked for Good. Hedda is, in my opinion, one of the better films of this year, really takes Ibsen's Hedda Gabler and transforms it in a way that plays respect to the original story, but understands that DaCosta is telling it in a new way with biracial politics and leading to very different conclusions. It takes leaps and bounds, but the source material is still there. And of course, because the central character is now a biracial bastard, we get to have a new conversation about who Hedda is, and the love triangle turned sapphic also allows us to have different conversations about what it means to be a queer white woman versus a queer black woman. And also Nina Haas in that dress, thank you so much. We love you, we appreciate it, you looked amazing. Rather than running away from the changes this implies, they are really embraced, and it makes for a really amazing story. Then you get Wicked for Good, a film that was always going to struggle adapting one of the most popular ongoing Broadway shows of a generation that has massive flaws baked into it that cannot be fully changed. That lack of change makes For Good more enjoyable to me than the actual stage musical, but destined to be flawed in a way that is just damning. It's never going to be as good as part one. The insinuation that Del Toro, because he was a white man, a white Latino man, that he would not understand this text. As someone who has frequently been told that because I'm black, I don't understand European text, I find it very vexing, because what the fuck do you mean?
Alright, sorry for coming to you from a different angle. I had some tech issues, so here I am trying to do my best. I wanted to address this issue of having female directors directing Frankenstein. Not so much the issue, but the idea that it should have been a female director. Now, just as a rule of thumb, I think that female directors are already so underserved in this genre that, like, I love the idea. Frankenstein's in the open domain. Anyone can make a Frankenstein, so like, go at it. But I do think what made it feel disingenuous as a conversation, in my opinion, is that people were just naming white female directors. They were, you know, mentioning Greta Gerwig. They were mentioning Kathleen Bigelow, which I think is the weirdest one. They were mentioning, of course, Emerald Fennell, who is currently like doing with Wuthering Heights. And I just felt like you're just naming white women. Not a single woman of color was mentioned in these conversations, which was odd considering that Chloe Zhao directed, in my opinion, the second best movie of the year, Hamnet, second best after Sinners, and Nia DaCosta, who did Hedda, which I think is one of my favorite, probably in my top 5 or top 8 films of the year as well. And so it just kind of speaks to how performative this conversation was becoming. And I think it also ignores that we have had female perspectives of Frankenstein that are actually critical of what that can look like, because often when you have sort of like a female Frankenstein character, it ends up being a born sexy yesterday character, which is described as a character who has like an adult body but like a childlike brain. And this was best dealt with in Poor Things, which came out a few years ago, starring Emma Stone, and it won her second Best Actress Oscar.
Her mental age and her body are not quite synchronized.
It is based on a book, and while I have mixed issues on the movie itself, I do think it's very well made, and I think it's very clear in its intentionality, and I think it is overwhelmingly a sex positive film, and I don't think it's entirely male gazy, but I also think it's a little bit like over the top sometimes in ways that I'm just like, this doesn't really move me. But you know, I think that Emma Stone is an actress at the place in her career where she can decide if she wants to be naked or not, and so if she chooses to do it and they have intimacy coordinators, go off queen. What I do think is important is that in the book, which is more of a postmodernist book, the ending of it, which would be like the ending of like the movie, Bella Baxter, who is named Victoria in the book, who goes by Victoria, comes up and says this entire story was like a very romanticized version of my relationship with my second husband. I do not co-sign this. I think this is very dumb. The only reason I didn't burn this book is because it looked very expensive and it got a really good illustration of me. So like, that's cute or whatever. But this is like very much romanticizing this bullshit. And I think it's really brilliantly handled because it kind of touches on the whole unreliable narrator of who tells the story in Frankenstein and who tells the story of a person's life. And I think in a lot of ways Poor Things really understands that, especially the novel more so, and it uses its Frankenstein framing and conversations about gender to really illustrate those narrative issues from the original text of Frankenstein. Then you get something like Lisa Frankenstein, which was written by Diablo Cody and directed by Zelda Williams. Zelda, if by somehow you see this, we should get brunch. I think we would have a lot to talk about. We're both really cool bisexuals. In that film, you have Lisa Frankenstein, who's this very like macabre 80s girl. Her mother was murdered in front of her, essentially, and she kind of goes through this arrested development where she sees herself as this kind of outsider, and she's treated badly by some members of her family, and there's this sort of like detachment that she has that she kind of throws into pop culture and media and music. And then one day after she is almost assaulted, there's this big storm, and the crush that she has on one of the bachelors that's died, Cole Sprouse, comes to life, and he kind of becomes an extension of her will. He begins, you know, harming those who have harmed her, and allows her to work out these issues through their relationship. And I think what's clever about the film is that it understands that Victor Frankenstein is kind of like a narcissist that doesn't take responsibility for their actions, and Lisa, to a certain degree, does it as well. She has legitimate, problems and issues. However, she's also very immature in certain ways, and doesn't know how to deal with problems in a healthy way, and so she just becomes a corpse bride, as one is wont to do. And it's a very fun take on the Frankenstein genre, which also I think is subversive in the sense that she doesn't create the Frankenstein monster to be her boyfriend. They happen to fall in love, but it's not like it's not the Born Sexy Yesterday trope that it could have been. Then you get the upcoming film The Bride, which has Jessie Buckley as the bride, Christian Bale as Frankenstein's monster, and Maggie Gyllenhaal will be directing it, and Jake Gyllenhaal will be in the film as well. So it's very much like the Dark Knight reunion for everyone. It's like a 1930s crime film, which I think is, again, really fun, really interesting, and I love this use of the bride. But again, this is not like an accurate Frankenstein story, and that's okay, because Frankenstein is its own narrative, and the way it uses female characters is very much in a way of critiquing the ways in which women are helpless with men, in terms of how society places them and how hard it is to have autonomy in a society that will not give it to you. And I think that's really interesting and really compelling and really powerful, because The Bride is not from the novel and you have an opportunity to do different things with her, and she's in the open domain. You get to have interesting storylines like this one, and I like that we will be getting one with such an amazing actress with Jessie Buckley. And I think if you want something that's more accurate to the complicated narrative of Frankenstein, I think Penny Dreadful has probably the best pure Frankenstein adaptation. I know I use footage from the Kenneth Branagh version, and it's fine, but I think it's fine with a capital F. It's just a little dry. Great vibes, although it's hard for me to watch Kenneth Branagh and Helen Bonham Carter together. I know what they did. What they did to my love. But what I will say, and why I think I was so personally defensive of Guillermo del Toro and being able to make this movie despite being a man, is because I think what he did is something that I relate to, is taking something in the Western canon, taking something that is treated as universal narrative, and really infuse it with the culture that you come from and show exactly why you view it that way. He took this very European story and made it into like a Mexican telenovela in his own words, and he wanted to do that, and he wanted to do it with a Latino Victor Frankenstein. He wanted to make a narrative this way, and I think he brought that to life.
It's an emotional Mexican melodrama that we made. This is like a very European story told in an extremely Latin point of view. At one point I was like, "There's a lot, man. Is this too much?" And he's like, "Look, cabrón, it's not an accident that my Victor's real name is Oscar Isaac Hernandez." He's like, "This is right. This is his story. This is Guillermo's story. Refracted through, this 18-year-old English woman."
Yeah, I mean, it's the most Catholic Frankenstein way that I've ever seen, because I know he said that was his idea, that the Karloff version was like, oh, this is what a saint would be.
Well, he said he called Frankenstein the patron saint of imperfection.
We have to allow these kind of like modern takes to exist, because we already have the original. Like, we have all these. We have Sense and Sensibility coming out. We have, the new Pride and Prejudice coming out, and they're all very white and very boring to look at so far. I'll still watch them because, Jane Austen's my goat. But it's like, okay, recession indicators all around. Why I loved Anne with an E so much is because I love the Megan Fellows, Anne of Green Gables. That is like one of my foundational texts as a human being. It's etched into my bones. I love it. However, I think Anne with an E really expanded the world of Avonlea in ways that I hadn't even thought of as a fan, and I found it just, enriching to watch, because I'm like, this is different, this is challenging, this is provocative, and I love that about it. It's the same reason why, even though I love Frances Hodgson Burnett's A Little Princess, I still love the Alfonso Cuarón version, even though it's so different, because I love what it has to say about girlhood and society. And even though it makes really big changes to the original text, those changes create such a beautiful climax narratively that I'm like, whatever, go, whatever you do. And it's like, I have a very book accurate version of A Little Princess already, which I think is really great, and I go to it. But I think for a film, it's so great that we are able to take these texts that we are told as, others are universal, and being able to bring our own perspective into it. Because if I were to adapt A Little Princess or Clarissa or any of my favorite, texts from like the Western canon, they would be different because my lens is different. That's why I so admire the changes that Nia DaCosta made with Hedda, of taking Hedda Gabler and still making it feel like that text, but also taking these bold creative liberties with the source material and then allowing those elements to weave into the text, where it's not taking anything away from it, it's just adding a different kind of story. And I think because it's a play, so people feel more flexible with that anyway, but I just feel when we have that as an example of what happens when you can just do a really engaging new look at a story. It's a shame that we see the changes that Del Toro made, that some people see them as just sort of like flattening, when I really, really feel he was taking his love for this story and synthesizing it into a really well-made piece of Gothic literature. And I think we're also seeing people really feel differently about what Gothic literature is, and I think that's really interesting. Like, we're having all of these interesting lessons about literature and film and aesthetic happening all at once, and between that and Nosferatu, and apparently there's a Dracula movie coming out, there's a Wolfman movie, like, we really are seeing all of our monsters ourselves, and it's really fun and engaging and different, and I embrace it. Now back to the regularly scripted production, hopefully.
I also reject the infantilization and blind hero worship of Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley was a deeply progressive woman and had solid politics that would shame some of her contemporary writers right now, honestly. Except Sally Rooney, because you're always doing it, queen, you're always on top of it. But her adult life had her grappling with a lot of her choices and treatments of others, especially the more vulnerable women around her that she did not protect or whose pain she ignored for her own satisfaction, because she was a person. And we don't help women by ignoring that they were human and imperfect. If I take the most generous reading of some of the criticisms of the film that go beyond just taste, I think people feel as if folks do not trust audiences, that everything needs to be spoon-fed, and therefore watching a film that draws pretty firm moral lines in a text that they think is more complicated seems like a watering down. But I don't think Del Toro is someone who doesn't trust his audience. I think he has an artistic opinion on the text of Frankenstein, one no one has to agree with. But I think the assumption of laziness on a project that was clearly made with love, thought, and care speaks to how we are absorbing the cynicism of online spaces. I don't think it's helpful, and it creates a monster much less hot than Jacob Elordi when we cannot just, disagree. Essentially, you are allowed to dislike Frankenstein. My own brother does, and I still love him, mostly. But if you imply that my good Tio Guillermo does not understand Frankenstein, I will fight you in the streets. And I just want to state for the record that I do hate that this film ends on a Lord Byron quote, because this is a Carolyn Lamb apologist account. Not really, but yes.
Well, we've warned you.